We're so much more than just the reflections we see. We're not just the image. We're actually the reflections of the habits in which we have lived through and the results of those habits in which we have. For myself, it was a habitual habit of waking up, having breakfast, going to work, coming home, eating, watching some TV, maybe eating again. Again and again and again I would do this. And by show of hand in the audience, how many of you live this life every day? It's most of us. It's a constant repetition of a Groundhog Day. We live the same life every day. And what ends up occurring is that we end up having this moment in our life that we all of a sudden hit a wall. And we have this wake-up moment. A wake-up moment that shakes us to the core. For me, it was 2009. In 2009, I was sitting in a conference hotel room just outside of Philadelphia. In that hotel room, I was reflecting on a speech that I had heard earlier that day by a speaker. And in that speaker's notes, he was explaining how he had changed his life and how he had helped advance his career and what was needed. As I reflected on that, I still remember sitting in that chair and looking forward and just thinking through his words. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a scale inside of the bathroom. Now, you might think this is crazy, like what's this about this scale? Well, when I saw that scale, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, I was drawn to actually go step on that scale. Over the last 9 years, I had seen the same thing every time I stepped on a scale, air. For some reason, those 3 letters gave me comfort every time I saw them, because they hid behind them the simple truth of the number that was actually behind there. Today was very different. Today, I didn't see 3 letters. Today, I was given my number of reasons of why I needed to change my habits in my life. 425. 425 reasons I was just given in an instant of the habits I had had and the results in which they had occurred. My career was stalling out. My health was horrible. I was going nowhere. But I did make one good decision that day. That speaker who I had heard and was contemplating, I spoke to him after that speech, and I'd asked him if he would actually help and mentor me, to help me go from being a quota-carrying sales schmuck into something greater, into being a sales manager was my goal. But before I did that, I did make one other decision. I needed to get some food in me. So what did I do? I ordered a course like any other obese man would do. I got a burger, of fries, but I did get a Diet Coke because that made all the difference. That Diet Coke was, of course, the forward momentum I needed in life. Let's face it, right? We make these declarations to ourselves, and when we make these declarations, we say, we're going to do this, just to backslide almost immediately. And that's what happened to me. But the words of Jack continue to ring through. For 6 months, I would work with Jack, and he would help me actually progress my career. So much so that by August of 2009, I would actually find my way into a sales manager position. And that day was a very interesting day. When I got advanced into sales manager, I wanted to post and celebrate and talk about what had just happened. I specifically wanted to tell a story about Jack that he shared with me, that back when he was when he was in his 50s, Jack had a crazy idea one day that he was going to do a half Ironman. And when he did it, he just signed up for it, showed up, didn't even know how to swim, and attempted to doggy paddle his way to the 1.2 mile swim. Sure enough, he almost drowned and actually ended up having to get carried out. But what he did most importantly was over the next year, he trained his face off and completed that race next year and went on to complete additional marathons and Ironmans across the world. And I always remembered that, and I wanted to share that story as part of my story of the progression I made over the last 6 months. But instead, I shared something else, something that was weighing on me and I felt I needed to share, and I shared it, of course, on Facebook, of all places. Mine was a declaration. I had no idea what inspired this poster when I originally did it, but I did write it. That for far too long, my weight had gotten out of control. And that I decided I was going to set a goal right then and there and share it with everybody. That in 1 year's time, I was going to finish the Chicago Triathlon with no clue how I was going to do it. But I decided to do it. As I hit send and I posted this thing, it lit up like a Christmas tree. I had likes, I had comments, I had all of these things. And they were inspiring me that I could actually do this. Until one person asked the one question that I was not ready to get. So what training plan have you had to actually accomplish this in 1 year? I had no idea. But I'd committed myself. So I did like all of my habit was up until that point. I decided I'm going to wing it. We're just going to go for this bad boy, and we're going to get through this thing. So I did, went to the gym, and I did something I called running, which was more like walking, maybe. I did a little stationary bike, and I tried to swim, and it was going nowhere fast. 2 months went by. 2 months later, I realized I stepped on the scale. I was going nowhere. So back to Google, and the almighty Google, I went to try to find a solution. And a group I found, which was Chicago Endurance Sports. The group of CES had on their website, I'll never forget, right on their homepage, it said, finish your first triathlon with us by your side. And I was like, perfect. Went on their triathlon page, and I was like, okay, what do you got for me here, CES? And as I scrolled down, I remember seeing right in the middle of the website, it said, couch to triathlon in 1 year. I'm like, holy cow, I got it. I'm a fat guy on a couch, and I need to complete a triathlon in 1 year. It's like you guys found me, and I didn't find you. So I signed up right then and there, got my credit card out, paid for it. Off to my first class I went inside of that week. When I walked into that first class to meet this team, I'll never forget, I all of a sudden am face to face with all of these individuals who, from amateur to pro and everything in between, but they're all in shape. And here I am, this big old 400-pound boy walking in the door saying, here I am to run a race too. And you could see it on their face, the sheer terror of what they were about to get themselves in to try to help. But I knew these people could help me. I knew they had the habits, and they were taking the actions necessary to live a healthier life and to be able to get me across that finish line. So, with everything inside of me, I swallowed my pride, and forward I went. And I decided to let these people teach me their habits. And some of the habits that they decided to brainwash me with, well, I guess maybe just talk me into. First one was the crazy skinny person habit of running. Oh, running. Man, to this day I still hate that sport, but I still do it. And with running, you have to understand, I'm having all these people who are in shape and telling me how they'd wake up in the morning and have this wonderful feeling of, oh, I went for my magical run, and after I was done, I felt great all day. And for me, I'm like, I'm 400 pounds, man. I just went for this run and felt like hell for the whole day. But hey, I committed, and I did it. Each day, I tried. Shortly after I committed to CES, I ran my first ever race. First thing I ever did. I never ever even thought of doing this. It was the Shamrock Shuffle 8K in Chicago, and I finished. I actually finished ahead of 872 people. I still remember that. And I ended up coming to find out half of those people were over the age of 70. What can you do? Hey, but I got it done. The next thing they talked me into was biking and cycling. And one of the things they told me with cycling is they said, you got to get a good bike, Michael. They said, you got to make sure you have a great bike for the race. They said, get a road bike. It's universal. It's good for you. So I went off and bought a road bike. The thing I didn't realize is that a road bike doesn't have what you call a seat. They have a thing they like to call a saddle. And when you're pressing 400 pounds, let me tell you about a saddle for a second. A saddle is a thing that once you sit on becomes invisible as a big man. It looks like basically you grew a wheel out of your butt and handlebars and a wheel out of your gut. But I grew to love that bike. Me and that bike had some good adventures. I ended up loving that bike so much that I ended up signing up for a second team at CES to do a Century Ride. Century Ride is a 100-mile bike ride that you do in one day. And before I ever even touched the starting line of the Chicago Triathlon, I completed 2 of those. Hardest days of my life, emotional days of my life. I remember crying, endless tears in the middle of those things, but I completed them, and I got them done. Swimming was my last sport that I needed to get done, and I needed to figure out. For me, swimming was easy. The reason why? I'm a big boy, and guess what? Big boys float in water, so it was actually pretty straightforward. I just needed to propel myself forward. The other main interesting thing I had to learn was swimming was putting on a wetsuit. And man, that was no easy feat for a 300, almost 400-pound boy, but I did it. And I did it every day, and I got down to Lake Michigan as much as I could and swam in that open water, as cold as it was. For almost a year, I would continue on this path, and I would continue to press forward and learning new habits and pushing these habits to be ingrained inside of me. And then I will never forget the day I finally stepped back on the scale. I gave myself almost 10 months off of that scale. And when I did, I saw a number that was amazing. 310 pounds. 115 pounds I lost in under a year. I was feeling on top of the world. I was 3 weeks out from my race, feeling like nothing could touch me. And then I got an email that added to it. Jack himself sent me this email, And and I remember opening this email to this day. It was the same day I checked my weight. And all it was this really weird email because it was a forward. And as I looked through the forward, it was like, if you remember how you forward messages, the images get all blurred, right? They get all mixed up and jarbled. And I'm trying to go through it and piece this thing together. And I realized it's a forward of a race confirmation. And it's a forward for the Chicago Triathlon race confirmation. So I scroll back up to the top and look at the top, and I realize it's from Jax, and it's Jax. And what he says is a one-liner. I'll see you at the finish line, Michael. I was so nervous at that moment, I couldn't even explain it. I took my last 3 weeks. I worked out harder than I've ever worked out in my life. I trained, I did everything. I made sure that the guy who just inspired me, who now is going to come race this race with me, was going to be proud of what he got to see. Day of the race, 3 a.m., I hit T-Town, what we call transition there. I loaded up my bike, got all my gear set out, just like my coaches told me. I had everything crazy perfect because I wanted to make sure I didn't screw anything up. Taped my goo to my bars, did everything, had my water bottles, and I was off and I was ready to go. Got my wetsuit and started walking down to the swim start. As I was at the swim start, I had this realization that this is real, this is actually happening. And it started racing through my head all the things that I was learning and all the habits that I had taken in and the actions I needed to take going forward. Got my wetsuit on. Whew, man, that was a fun feat, but I got it. And then I got excited because it was hotter than hot that day and to get in that water. And I remember sitting in the water, treading water, with 50 of my closest friends as we were getting ready for a mass swim start for our wave. And I remember looking at the clock, 10, 9, 8, and so on. And then the horn blew. And when that horn blew, all craziness broke out. For all of you guys who have never seen the start of a triathlon with a mass swim start, let me paint a picture here for you. 20 to 50 people in a crammed little area, not bigger than this red carpet that I'm standing on. And all of us looking to go one direction with a variance degree of skills and ability to swim at different speeds. When that horn blows, everyone moves. You have arms, you have feet, you have every body part slamming against you. And all I could hear in my head was my swim coach telling me, pick a line, stick your line. Pick your line, stick your line. And I did, and I swam. And I swam hard. And I remember seeing people underneath me. I remember seeing people by the side of me. I remember seeing little boys and girls crying their eyes out because they were too scared to continue on the swim. But I stayed my line. And I finished that swim. First step done. Next thing is I got on my bike. Now, mind you, I'd done 200-mile bike races ahead of this. I felt so confident on this bike. I was like, nothing is going to touch me. I'm almost pro. And off I went down Lakeshore Drive on this thing, and I was flying, passing people, feeling great, feeling good. And then the reality that every triathlete gets to face at some point happens. It's hard to see her in this picture, but right behind me in this picture is a lady on an old school Huffy mountain bike. And as I'm flying down Lakeshore Drive, this lady passes me like I'm standing still. And that moment I realized no matter how far I've come in this triathlon sport of mine, I have a long way to go. After I got off that bike, I was very pleased to remember there was one habit that my run and cycling coach did teach us, which is T2 transition. When you get off that bike and go into a run, when you get off of that thing, your legs are jello. And it was so reassuring to me when I hopped off that bike and I felt those jello legs to remember all the training that we had done getting prepared for this. And off on the run I went. That run was something of a mixture of a walk, crawl, cry thing. But I remember circling that final corner and seeing the finishers shoot. And every piece of energy I had left went into a sprint down to the finish line. And next thing I knew, I was a triathlete. Shortly after, Jack finished his race, and we stood in front of Buckingham Fountain and celebrated together an accomplishment that took a year. An accomplishment that was that was the hardest thing that I had ever done, but was so much more than a guy who went from 420 pounds to a guy who is now sitting at 305 crossing a finish line. It would also progressed my entire career. During this time, I went beyond even my dreams of being just a sales manager. I actually went all the way on to becoming a sales director. I ended up starting and leading one of the highest producing sales teams for our company, which led us to eventually winning 3 different Inc. 500 awards and eventually getting acquired because of our sales production and marketing production. But more important than all of that was when I sat back and realized what actually led to everything. What was it that got me from point A to point B? It took 10 years to figure that question out. And how it came was a random day when Jack Daly called me back and said, Michael, I want to include you in my book that I'm writing. And I want to talk about your story because I don't think I've ever seen anyone who's really shown the ability to take action off of a goal they set like you have. And I remember sitting there very thrilled and honored to have being included in Jack's book, but I also remember having this moment of realization that my actions that I originally took were wrong. I just went to the gym and tried to wing it. It was the actions and habits I learned from the people I then surrounded myself with that got me where I was trying to go, with my career and with my health. Those people and the actions and the reflections I took and those habits I took from them and made them my own is what advanced me completely. It's what allowed for me to go even from that 305-pound new triathlete to advancing it even further, to completing in multiple short and long distance triathlons, going into marathons and half marathons, and more than anything else, taking all of this and pushing it down into my family so that my family could see what is possible when a person makes a declaration, changes their habits, and follows through on what they say they're going to do. Since that day, I've done a lot with my health and my professional career. I'm no longer even just a director of sales. I've gone on to start multiple companies around the world. I've gone and have the opportunity to stand on stage. But more important than anything, I've continued to tell my story of how I got there by making sure I surrounded myself with other people. And nothing encapsulates this better than Proverbs 13:20, of one who walks with wise people will be wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. I have learned this on both sides. My journey has not been without folly. Every time I have found myself with people who are not of the path in which I am trying to intend to go down, I end up seeing harm coming out of it. But I continue to remind myself that if I continue to help and tell people of what got me to here, that they can then use this as their wake-up moment to go to where they need to be. So today, everyone, I would share with you this. To take this as a wake-up moment, to take this and understand that you have the ability to change anything in your life with very minor steps. A step of declaration, not to yourself, but to everybody. Tell the world what you want to accomplish and make them hold you accountable to it. Find people who have already done what you are trying to do and accomplish. Those people will teach you the skills and habits you need to learn, because I am telling you now you don't have them. Otherwise, you've already been doing it. And once you have accomplished it, make sure you tell the world about it. Because when I told the world about it, something magical happened. Something more than I could have ever imagined. Years later, my grandfather would call me, and he would tell me, Michael, in his great southern voice, if I can do this, Michael, baby, I want you to run a race with me because I think we can do it. And at 70 years old, I had the great distinct honor, just down in Oak Ridge, to run the 5K race with my grandfather, my aunt, and at that time my little daughter, and 4 generations of McMillans crossed that finish line. There is nothing more magical than knowing that your story inspired others, but more than anything, inspired multiple generations of your family to now take over their health and to see that something more is accomplishable if they just declare it. They find people who are going to do it. They reflect those habits of those people, and they tell others of it. So again, today, I tell you, don't be concerned over what and how you're going to get there. Declare it and find people who've done it, and you can accomplish anything. Thank you very much.